Hello. Welcome to Bla Bla Black Sheep, a weekly podcast where I answer your yarny questions and tell you about all things yarn going on in my life. Welcome back. It's marvelous to be here with you again. I'm having such a good time with these, so I really appreciate that you guys are enjoying them as well. I am wearing my Arlitt Cowl. I've worn it before. We're only 4 episodes in and I've worn it before, but the reality is that this is the thing I wear the most right now. It's officially spring, but we're still feet deep in snow. So it's easy to throw on, it's cozy. A lot of times this is nice and tall. And what I'll do when it's really chilly out is I'll fold the top half over. So it gives me kind of a double up by my neck and ears, which is just lovely. I will link that down below. And then I'm wearing again my little sheepy earrings from Cheeky Ceramics. And I was talking with my local yarn shop owner who is also named Sarah. Her shop is called Casting On. It's a wonderful place. And she was saying she has some of these in stock. So if you would like a pair lickety split, I'm going to put her email address in the show notes below so that if you want something quick, she said you can email her and she'll accommodate you. So yeah, that's what I'm wearing. I'm also wearing one of my most favorite sweatshirts. I bought this back in the pandemic. And while I was homeschooling the boys, it was a staple in my wardrobe. Many a sweatpant and sweatshirt was worn that year, but it's starting to fall apart. Look at that. I'm so sad. Even my youngest today was like, Mom, goodness. But I've been considering doing some, what are the kids calling it? Like mending, but like intentionally like fun mending. Oh my gosh, if you know what that's called or you've done it before, let me know in the comments. I would love advice on if you think it's a stupid trend and I'm gonna regret it later if I do that. Is it called exposed mending? I don't know. I'm gonna keep going. I've also thought that it's just right along where the ribbing meets the sleeve, and since I'm short anyways and I tend to wear my sleeves pulled up, that maybe I could just take the ribbing off, cut that part out of the sweatshirt and seam it back on just higher up. I don't know, let me know what you think. Let me tell you about the thing that is bringing me so much joy. So we had a chaotic week last week. My husband was supposed to be gone all week traveling, and he left on Monday. Benton went down sick on Tuesday, and then Brian called me on Tuesday and was like, oh yeah, things happened, I'm coming back home. So he came back home. He had crazy travel schedule and was not feeling well when he got home. The little one stayed sick for days. It was just, the big one went down on Friday with illness. Turns out that was just fake, but which I'm grateful for. I'm glad he wasn't sick too, but it was a crazy week last week. But so in the plan of my husband being gone all week, I was like, why would I cook anything, worthwhile when he's the only one who appreciates it and he's not even going to be here? So the plans were like pizza and mac and cheese and chicken fingers and whatnot. But the one thing Benton really wanted to do was he wanted to have a movie night where we could eat dinner and watch the movie. He was very excited about that. So even though my husband ended up coming home, we decided to still do the movie night on Friday night. You guys, it was so much fun. It was a little bit of a doing because just because the dog, and like our rule is you always eat at the table because otherwise he gets up in your business. So it was fine. But we watched the movie Mitchell's versus the Machines. You guys, we've watched it several times, but this is my thing that brought me so much joy in this last week. If you have not watched the movie Mitchells versus the Machines, you must. It is hilarious. Even if you don't have little kids, I think you'll find it funny. I'm not sure I don't know if my parents would find it all that funny, but oh my gosh, I think it's hilarious. We laughed our heads off. Maya Rudolph plays the mom in it. It's just, oh, it was so fun. So fun. I'm sure we'll be doing another movie dinner again sometime soon because it was a good time. So, okay, let me share with you my mug. Look at this mug. I love it. And look, smile. So I wanted to share with you this mug because I love it. Again, look, it like matches my sweatshirt almost, or somewhere between my curtains and my sweatshirt. It's blue. I love blue. And it's a great little mug. But this is so special because this is made by a friend of mine that I went to school with from elementary school all the way up through high school. We went to school together. We were close friends in elementary school. We grew apart and did different things as we got older, which is fine. But she is like the nicest person in the world. She lives in Colorado now, and she is doing, I believe, pottery full time, and she's got lots of great stuff. Her shop is called Hello Fern Creations. This was a one of a kind, so you're not going to get this exact mug, but especially if you love things like biking and fishing and mountains and that kind of stuff, she's got really cool mugs. I'm definitely going to have to get a new one, another one of hers sometime soon. So I highly recommend that. I have to share with you, I have no yarn to share this week. Not because I don't have yarn, but I don't have new yarn that I got this week. But I ordered some yarn. One of the questions I have received in the question form, which if you would like to ask a question about anything related to me and yarn and projects, a project you're working on, a problem you have, a question you've always had but never knew who to ask me. One of the questions was, what other podcasts do you recommend, yarny and not? And I have one yarny podcast that I've been watching for a long time, but I was like, surely there's some other good ones out there. So I've been perusing the podcast so that I can recommend some more yarn podcasts as well. I have lots of non-yarn podcasts because I listen to podcasts a lot. But one of the troubles with this is other podcasters share yarn that they are purchasing in their podcasts, and then I see it and I want the yarn. I have like a hair sticking out here that's driving me nuts. Okay, I'm gonna leave it alone. And so I was being so good. Well, first of all, I was watching this one by this woman who's in Norway, and like I can't get the yarn she has because it's all like, I mean, I probably could, but it's all from Norway and mostly. But then she mentioned a farm in Montana that raises their own animals for fiber and then mills it, and she had it and she was like, oh, I love this, I recommend it, blah blah blah. And I was like, well, okay, fine. So I checked them out and so I have a package that is coming from them. So I went out to my doorstep one day and there was a package there, and I was like, oh, how exciting, my yarn from Montana came, I'll share it on my next podcast. And I brought the box in, and then I started thinking about it, and I was like, that's weird. Most people don't send yarn in a box. Most people send yarn in like a mailer, like an envelope. Like I didn't order that much yarn. It wasn't like, you know. And so I started looking at the return address label on the box, and I was like, that's even more weird because it says nothing about Montana. And this whole, like, the whole return address is like odd. So I was like, maybe I should open this before I just open it on the podcast. Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm so glad I did. You want to guess what was in the box? I opened the box. I'm like, yarn, yarn, yarn. Whoop. Oh, nope. It's bras. I ordered some they were on super sale, and oh man, bras are expensive. And so I almost brought a box and said, look at my new yarn, and then it was going to be bras. So I am so glad that I opened that before I just opened it here on the podcast. So yeah, good times. Probably going to be paranoid about that forever now. So fun story. Okay, I want to share with you, and you're hearing it first. In April, we are going to be doing what I'm calling a shawl along. I asked some of my friends if I could say, shall we shawl along? And they said, no, Sarah, too far, too far. So we're going to call it a shawl along. And here's the deal. It's going to be wide open. We're going to make shawls. I am feeling the shawls lately. Not wearing one currently, but I've been wearing them a lot. I've had inspiration for design endlessly for shawls. Many more coming in the future because of that. But the deal is going to be, there are going to be some prizes. There's going to be new patterns. You can use old patterns. You can join in with any shawl that you want to qualify for the prizes. The only stipulation is that you need to work one of my patterns. It can be a pattern you've already purchased that you're like, oh, I've wanted to do this, but I've been putting it off. Now's the time. We'll do it together. Maybe somebody else will pick that shawl too, and you can like work along together. You can have a shawl that you like had on hold for a while, but you need some motivation to get it done. Join us. You can pick a new pattern of mine. On that note, I wanted to share with you the poppy shawl. This one is with my tech editor currently. I am so excited for this one. I love it. It is more of a traditional size shawl. So big long wingspan, nice deep V, but you can see really open fabric. And then this is becoming my signature shape because as a short person, it just fits better. It's kind of a heart shape. So it comes to a point in the center and then comes up and kind of around because it just wraps so nicely. So this one is the more traditional shape. And then I need to get this out to testers. I'm going to do it this week. I'm going to get this out to testers. This is, I'm doing a whole sister shawl situation here. This is Zoe, and Zoe is similar stitches, slightly different edging, slightly different body stitches, but she is longer and shorter. So a little bit more of a lighter weight shawl situation, and great for short people like me. A more traditional shawl, especially if I want to wear it like not tight around my neck but a little looser. It's really long on me, so love this for somebody who doesn't like a lot of bulk or who is short like me. The poppy shawl is coming out next Thursday. If you would like the very best discount code on that pattern, check out the show notes below. Sign up for my email list. They get the best deals on those things. I'm going to send the, so that's for the poppy shawl coming out next week. Send this one off to testers. My hope is that this one will come out partway through the shawl along. And then there's going to be one more sister shawl that I haven't started yet. So the idea is percolating, but I'm very honored to have just gotten notification that a yarn company has accepted one of my design proposals. So that's kind of come first because that's on a deadline and on a contract. So there will be a third sister shawl. I think I talked about it. I showed you the yarn last time for it, the 3 cakes of yarn, and I think I talked about it a little bit there too. So you can check that out if you would like. If you missed it. So shawl along starting in April. Yay. All right. We're going to dive into questions here. All right. Here we go. I'm excited about these. So the first question is like a follow-up from last week. So if you haven't watched again, if you haven't watched last week's episode, you can go back and watch last week's episode 3 to see where this started, what the first question was. So the question is, last week you talked about buying yarn on a trip. Yes, I did. Do you have tips for picking yarn when you're on a trip and when you're on a budget and can only buy a skein or 2? And I would say this goes for a budget, but also like a lot of times when I'm on a trip, I don't have infinite suitcase space, especially if you're flying, right? You're limited to how many suitcases and carry-ons and all the things. And if you're like me, you probably brought like 10 projects for your 1-week trip, because I always think I'm going to get more accomplished when I'm traveling, and I do not. So when you're on a trip and you want to buy some yarn, I highly recommend this. One of my most favorite things to do, and my poppy shawl is made with yarn that I purchased on a trip. All of this yarn was purchased when I was on a trip with some girlfriends. And so now when I wear this, I think of our wonderful trip and my lovely girlfriends. Excuse me. So I highly recommend purchasing on a trip, because then you have memories of, you're like making your own memento of the trip, right? You not only love your handmade item, but you also have memories of the trip and the special event wrapped up in that. So that's so fun. So usually when I go on a trip, except for with these ladies, because we were all yarn friends and we very much encouraged each other to just like, it's a special time. Go ahead and buy that. And we visited several yarn stores. So I would say plan ahead. These are my tips. Plan ahead. Look to see if there's a yarn shop where you're going. If a goal of yours is that you like to stop by the yarn shops while you're traveling. So check to see if there's a yarn shop. Look at your stash before you go. See what you have. If you're like me, you're notorious for picking up just a skein and then not really having anything to go with it. Take a quick picture of a skein or 2 that you might need like a buddy for with your phone. Then you have it with you when you travel so that you can know, you can kind of compare it. That's not the very best comparison because, pictures don't capture real life perfectly, but that's an option. So go through your stash before you go, or if you're hesitant to try to pair new yarn with yarn that you don't have right there with you, pick a project. Go to your Ravelry favorites or your Ravelry patterns that you've already purchased, and pick a hat pattern that you'd like to make, and then that's probably only going to take 1 skein of yarn. And then as you're looking, when you're traveling, you can know like, oh, I've chosen this cabled hat pattern, so probably something that is a tonal or a solid color is probably best because that's going to show the cables the best. Or this is a really fun texture that'll highlight some variegated, hand-dyed, speckly kind of situation, and then you kind of know what you're looking for before you even go. But if you are not a planner aheader, which I'll be honest with you, I'm a big planner aheader with the other things. I don't usually planner ahead for my yarn purchases on a trip. I usually don't even look to see if there's a yarn shop until we're like on the road. If you didn't plan ahead, here is my recommendations. Or if you like looked for yarn shops and you were like, there are none, but then you stumbled into like a gift shop that wasn't a yarn shop but actually had some yarn in it, and you want to make a purchase. So if you didn't have a plan, go with your color palette. I have really focused on a color palette these past couple years, and it has really helped me purchase yarn that I know I'm going to use and that will coordinate with lots of other things within my stash. I have a couple videos on why you should have a color palette and how to choose a color palette. I'll link all of that stuff in the show notes for you to check those out after we're done chatting here. But if you find a yarn and you're like, oh, I'm in love. I'm in love. This is amazing. You are not going to regret buying it. Even if it goes with nothing else in your stash, you will find a project, maybe not immediately, but someday you will find the perfect project for that. And you will be so glad you bought it. And you'll have the memories of your trip and this great yarn that you loved and a new project you love too. So you can't go wrong if you absolutely love it. And then my third suggestion for if you didn't go with a plan is if you are visiting somewhere, try to find a yarn that is special to that place. Whether it's like all in, there's a local sheep farmer who makes his fiber and spins it into wool, and they have some skeins of that yarn that was locally produced. Or even if it's a shop that has like a local dyer. So somebody, you know, like, so the poppy shawl is a great example. We were in Chicago. That yarn was purchased at a yarn shop in Chicago, and it was dyed by a dyer from Chicago. So it was all very local, even though it wasn't like somebody had a sheep farm. So make it something special to the specific place that you're visiting. So that's fun too. So those are my suggestions. If you have some suggestions, drop them in the comments below about how you pick your yarn, how you pick yarn when you travel. Setting a budget might be a good idea, or saving up a little money before you go, because I know traveling itself can be very expensive. But if you say I have whatever, probably at least 25, we'll get you a skein of yarn, or 30. Yeah, those are my suggestions. So if you have more, I'd love to hear them and join the conversation in the comments. So, all right, I have one more question, and it's a little more in depth, but I'm gonna try to cover it. You know, I'm gonna try not to babble on too long, I guess is what I'm saying here. So the question is, what yarn weights held together make other yarn weights? So what they're asking is, if I'm going to make a sweater and I decide that to make my fabric, I want to, instead of taking one strand of a yarn, I want to take 2 strands of fingering and hold them together to make that sweater or whatever. Instead of using let's say I want to make a sweater and I want it to have that fuzzy, or hat. Why do I keep saying sweater? It can be anything. Mittens, hat, cowl, scarf. I want it to be like fuzzy, you know, and so I want to hold a mohair with my fingering weight yarn. What yarn weight am I going to end up when I hold 2 yarns together? So here's the sad news. The truth is, it depends. I used to think that they lined up real nicely, that like if I hold 2 lace weights, I get a fingering. If I hold 2 fingerings, I get a sport. If I hold 2 sports, I get a DK. If I hold 2 DKs, I get a worsted. That is not the case. And anything that simplifies it like that, that says this equals this, this equals this, this equals this, it's a massive oversimplification of yarn weight. I always say that yarn weights are like women's jeans. You know how men's jeans, they say real things like 32 inches. And women's, it's like size 14. Yarn weights are like women's jean sizes, not men. So the weight of a yarn is a category, and it's confusing because we think of weight as like how heavy something is, and that's a very mathematical and specific measurement. But yarn weights are a category, and they can run the gambit from light to heavy in each of those categories. So you can have a light fingering or a heavy fingering. You can have a light worsted to a heavy worsted. And so when you combine those yarns, it really depends on where in the category those fall, your yarns that you're holding together fall to what they're going to make. So that's not helpful, right? But good news, good news. I did a little research on this actually and found a really helpful blog post about this. It's not my blog post, but I will link it in the show notes below. It is by a knitter and it's a knitting blog, but don't let that throw you because it's about yarn weight and combining yarns. And so it works the same for crochet. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the two things she says in there. And then you can, I'll link that below and you can go read the whole blog post, maybe bookmark it so you can come back to it if you have a question later. So she says, if you are combining two of the same yarn, so not even like one fingering and another fingering, but like, let's say you have, you want to make a hat. I'm going to say hat this time. You want to make a hat and you're like, I love this fingering weight yarn that I have in my stash. I love the color. I love all the things about it. But I love this hat pattern that's for a DK weight hat, let's say. So you're going to take that skein of fingering and you're going to hold two strands of that one yarn. So it needs to be the same yarn, whether it's two balls of the exact same yarn or you're pulling from the inside and outside of one ball. Doesn't matter. The point is it has to be the same yarn. So if you're holding together the same yarn, then what you're going to do is you are going to take the yards. So let's say I have a fingering weight yarn, let's just say, and it has 400 yards per 100 grams. So if I hold that double, then I'm halving the number of yards that I have, right? So held double, 400 yards now becomes 200 yards per 100 grams. So take the 400 yards, divide it by 2, which, love the math on that, that's about 200 yards. And then compare the number of yards to the yarn that you're using, that is used in the pattern. The great thing is a lot of yarns go either 100 grams or 50 grams. And so those are easy things to compare. So let's say you had a pattern and the weight of the yarn that was used in the pattern by the designer was a yarn that was 210 yards per 100 grams. And when you take your yarn and take the yardage, divide it by 2, I said 400 to 200. 200 yards per 100 grams and 210 yards per 100 grams is pretty close. So that may be a good substitute. So that's one way you can do it if you're using the same. Now, if you are using different yarns, it's more complicated. It just is. The variation is greater, and this is one of the things. It took me, I reread her blog post a couple of times because it took a bit to like really comprehend all the things. So, so here's an example. If you're going to work with, let's say, a fingering weight yarn, I'm looking at my tablet here because I have my notes because I want to make sure I say this right. You're working with a fingering weight yarn that has 437 yards per 100 grams. And then you want to add a lace weight yarn. This is like you want a mohair or something that's going to add fluff or stability to like a sock or something like that. You're going to add a lace weight that has 874 yards per 100 grams. I kept the numbers simple here. So for every skein of lace weight yarn, you're going to need 2 skeins of fingering weight yarn to get the same number of yardage, right? So I'm going to take my fingering weight yarn that I need 2 skeins of and say that's 200 grams plus the 100 gram ball I would need of my lace weight yarn to give me just the, because we're holding them together, the 874 yards in 300 grams. Okay, so if I now want to compare 100 grams to my 300 grams, I need to take that 874 yards and divide it by 3. So now I have my quantity of yards per 100 grams. So that comes out to 291 yards per 100 grams, which gives you about a DK weight. So it's not uniform. You can also use wraps per inch, which is just you take anything, a ruler, a pencil, a dowel, wrap your yarn carefully around so that the yarns are touching, not squished, not too spread out, and then you use an inch, a ruler, that's what that's called. You use a ruler to measure an inch of those wraps, and you count, and then you can, I'll link below the Craft Yarn Council's wraps per inch chart. I will also link, there are charts about like DK weight is about this many yards per 100 grams, worsted weight is about this many yards, it's a range per 100 grams, and so I'll link all that stuff below. The truth is, any substitution of yarn is an adventure, and the main thing is you need to make gauge and have a fabric you like. So if you can make gauge and have a fabric you like, then play with it, have fun. I was going to talk about some reasons why you would want to hold yarns together, because you might be like, well, why would you ever do that? But I've talked for a while now. So you know what, I'm going to save that to next time. We'll talk about that next time. Come back next time and find out why the heck would you ever want to hold 2 yarns together. And maybe I'll give some tips on like how to do that too. Because why not, right? All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. Check out the show notes below for all the links to all the things. Do the YouTubey things, subscribe, share with a friend, like, comment, tell me about mending and your recommendations if you have them, what experiences you've had with substituting yarn. I'll link all the resources below too. Thank you so much again for joining me today on Bla Bla Black Sheep. Happy crafting!